Hello, I'm William Michael of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. Over the past few weeks, I've been studying the life of John Adams, who, if you're not aware, was one of the most influential men in or during the time of the War of Independence in America. I spent a lot of time reading biographies about him, learning the details of his life, studying his own writings, even his own autobiography, which is included in his writings. And one of the things that I noticed that was really striking was how much time and effort he put into journaling. This is something that I think we have lost today, and I think that it's been replaced with social media. And I know I've felt this at times. There are times where I've said, like, I really wish I could just get away from social media because it's useless. You end up wrangling with ignorant nobodies who just take pleasure in being obnoxious. It's not worth any time. It's the only benefit you can ever draw from it, or the only benefit that I would say I've ever drawn from social media has been getting into some arguments just for the sake of learning what some other people say on a certain topic. That's really the only thing I ever do on social media. I'll just be curious as to, if I throw a topic out onto social media, I'm just curious to know what the arguments will be. Other than that, it's really useless. You're going online where any clown can get a free account and start talking about popes and councils and presidents and laws and wars. Who knows what else? Healthcare, science, medicine. It's the most foolish thing to get wrapped up in. And yet many people do it. Billions of people do it. And I've asked myself a few times, why do I feel this attraction to engage with social media? And I think it's because there's a desire that we have. It's good and necessary. There's a desire we have to think about things going on in our lives, think about things we've learned, think about things we've read. We get some new idea in our head, and we want to do something with it. We don't just want it to disappear. We want to work with it. We want to sort of make it our own. We want to think about it. We want to reflect on it, and so on. And yet, what we're doing in this generation is we're running to social media and sharing it, and then the chaos ensues, and the trolls sign in, and by the time you're done, you're walking away from the computer irritated because you've wasted an hour, had to hear from these obnoxious people. And it's just this source of self-torment, going through this nonsense. And the more known you become, the more influential you become, the more aggressive the trolls get. And it's just so stupid. You spend your time arguing with people of no education, no influence, and try to give a reason for it, and you won't find one. But as I was studying John Adams over the past few weeks, I was really struck by some of the differences in their generation. And I can't pretend like these things are foreign, because 20 years ago I was doing some of these things before all of this internet technology and social media developed. I was a college student when the internet really sort of took off in the early to mid 1990s, I'd say. And I remember what we used to do before these things. And as I was studying the life of John Adams, it was just sort of bringing back to mind things that used to be considered normal that today are hardly practiced anymore. But But most significantly, two things I would say, two things. First of all, it was journaling. Journaling was so central to their lives. It was so central. All of the things that they would be reading or doing, events that would take place in their lives, everything went into their journals, and they kept these journals. And you can see that the reason why they kept the journals was because it fulfilled that desire that leads many of us today to social media. But it was private. It was for the sake of deliberation. It could be personal. It could be offensive. It could be, politically incorrect, but it was private. And you see that there's some wisdom. I shouldn't say some wisdom. I should say there's a lot of wisdom in just keeping all of that stuff private. Sometimes I'll have a very radical thought in my head that I think is right. And I'll have that desire to think about it, talk about it, do something with it. And I'll go on social media and write a post about it. And then, like I said, all of the obnoxious people will start chiming in, all the trolls will come in. You'll have people accusing you of heresy. All of the foolishness ensues. And then you end up walking away vexed by this stupid social media platform. Whereas, really, I think that those thoughts, those ideas need to be turned into a private journal and just deliberated on, chewed on, revisited at future times. And in the journal, you can have offensive things, politically incorrect things, questions that other people will all overreact to. All of that stuff can be put in a journal, and it's just private. And I was really struck just by how much attention men in that generation gave to journaling, just sitting alone in a quiet room with a pen and paper and writing out all these things, just getting all these thoughts out, keeping a record of things that happened, keeping a record of questions, keeping a record of things that were studied, things that were heard, things that were learned, things that were read, just keeping record of these things, chewing on it, deliberating on it, making decisions, working out the details of decisions that need to be made. It's just really so wise to be private and quiet and patient and calm and deliberate. I can just see how much wisdom and benefit there is in that practice, which I don't know about you, but I don't practice that. Now I do sometimes in some ways. For example, these walk talks that I started posting, originally I used to just go for walks. I used to go for walks, and that would be the time where I just thought to myself, sort of talked to myself, thought through things. Anytime I got stressed, anytime there was a decision to make, I'd be out in the driveway at 1 o'clock in the morning, just walking back and forth, thinking and praying and talking to myself, working through any complicated issues in my life. And then what would happen is we'd have visitors, someone would be staying with us, and I would just say, hey, come on, let's go for a walk. And we would end up talking, and I'd have these long discussions with whoever was visiting or happened to be at the place. And then I decided I wanted to be a little more private, because we used to host so many people, so many visitors and guests, just always in and out of the house. And I said, we really need to be a little more private. We have so much to do. And so I thought, you know what? I valued those conversations. I valued those discussions. I'm just going to do them myself and just post the talks, and then maybe there'll be some feedback or comments, and we'll sort of tone this down a little bit, because it was kind of crazy. So I go on walks and go out and think and talk to myself and pray and work through complicated things that come up. I don't write it down. I don't journal. Or when I do recorded talks, it's sort of like a journal, but not the same. It's not the same. And I could see, studying the life of John Adams and thinking of the weighty issues that those men had to deal with, the complex issues, the difficult situations, and they channeled all of that into their journals, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. That was the first thing. The second thing was, as they're there, they're sitting and they're thinking and they're writing and so on. They're journaling, working all these things out in their journals, and then they're writing letters. They're writing letters that may take days or weeks to deliver. The correspondence is much, much slower. There's much more time for thinking. And communication is not only less frequent, it's not only slower, but it also has to be more concise because you're paying for the length of your letters. And so concision becomes really important. You've got to choose what to include and what not to include. You've got to think of how to express yourself in as few words as possible. And then off it goes, and it may be days or weeks before there's a response. It's not an immediate response. Not 30 minutes and you get a response by email or text chat or whatever. It may be days, it may be weeks, it could be a month. You might get a pack of letters that have been held for several weeks and get them delivered all at once. And so you can see that society, that culture, was much more deliberative, much slower, slow to think, slow to speak, slow to write, slow to discuss things, slow to communicate, and spending lots and lots of time privately meditating, thinking, reading, researching, and so on. And there's just so much wisdom in that. And I think as great as social media is from a technological standpoint, I use it as much as anyone. And I'm sort of a most traditional person in the sense that I'm a classicist. Of all professions, to be a classicist. And I can't imagine studying without the use of these amazing tools. We have access to texts that wouldn't even be available. We'd have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars to collect printed texts that are available to us at no cost digitally. There's just no way around it. There's so many advantages. It allows for so much learning at such little cost. That's good. Having access to information is good. But then time and solitude is needed to digest and order all of that information. And this is where I think our society is really struggling. So I'm not anti-technology, I'm not anti-social media. I just think that we're using social media for things that should not be on social media. And look how stupid this is. There will be times where I'll think about writing something or posting something or commenting, and I have to stop myself and ask, in 10 years, somebody might go and dig through social media and find that I said something in a discussion and try to, cancel what I'm doing or attack my educational work because of some comment where I played devil's advocate in a discussion or proposed a question that's interpreted as some kind of statement. And you're just giving this material to a bunch of ignorant, emotional fools that you shouldn't even be talking to. And it's just not prudent. It's really foolish to do that. And so I think what drives us to social media is what used to drive men to journaling. A desire to chew on ideas, make them our own, order our thoughts, and constantly reform ourselves, reform our thinking, ask controversial questions. The most delicate and important questions, those questions shouldn't be asked in public. They shouldn't be discussed with the rabble, people who don't even read. They just spill their opinions all over the place. Jesus said, "Don't cast your pearls before swine." These discussions don't belong in public forums. These are things we should be praying through, reading about, researching, studying, reflecting, and so on. They should be private and quiet. And studying the life of John Adams really led me to see what a great need I have in my own life that I sense, but I respond wrongly to. What a great need there is in my life just for this practice, this discipline of quiet, private journaling. So that was helpful. And I think that there are issues like this where we're doing things in modern society that we don't really intend to do. We've just started using tools and making use of different resources and platforms that are available to us. It's sort of tantalizing because they're free to use. You can connect with lots of people. But it's just not appropriate. It's not the appropriate way to do what many of us are doing. And I know this is true of myself. I've asked myself time and again why I would even waste a minute on social media. And yet I feel, let's say I'll propose signing out and staying away for a while, but I'll feel an attraction to return to it. But what I think it is a need to work on my thoughts, which I should do by journaling, which I should do by private study, by prayer and meditation. And yet somehow the social media platforms have become the place where many of us do that, and it's really not appropriate, and it causes all kinds of trouble. There are things that I need to think about that are very controversial. There are things that I need to think about that would offend even the most intimate people in my life. There are questions I need to ask that I probably shouldn't even ask my wife or discuss with my wife. There are times where we struggle with things where those struggles should be kept private. For example, let's say there's something in the church that just irks us. Something about our personal preferences are not supported, or something is done that we don't like or we don't agree with. And what do? We immediately start talking about it publicly. We immediately talk about it publicly, and that's very foolish. Whereas you can see how much wiser it would be to take that frustrated thought, take that question or disagreement, and turn it into a journal entry. And just be quiet. Just leave it there. Write it out, think through it, research it, pray about it, and close the journal. And just give it time. We know this saying that with time, cooler heads will prevail. I mean, I experience that so often in my life. And you can just see how so many of the issues that come up, irritating issues, we immediately respond to them public. We think about them out loud in public and cause all kinds of trouble, because that's really not where these thoughts should be taking place. They shouldn't be taking place publicly. Now you could argue and say, well, you know what? You can post on social media, just make it private. And that might be a good solution, actually. Just make it private. Just use the social media platform as your place for journaling and make your quote-unquote journal entries private. Just limit the audience. That might be a good solution. But But what I think we have to learn is we have to learn that there's a lot of stuff that we should be thinking about and keeping to ourselves and not sharing publicly. You know, there's an old saying, rebuke privately and praise openly. You know, there are old wise sayings like that I think we really need to take seriously. Like, yes, you have the freedom of speech in America. You have the freedom of speech. And as long as the Constitution is the law of the land, none of us can say otherwise. Every American has the freedom of speech. That's freedom to say things that you don't like. Freedom to say things that you don't agree with. But those things don't need to be spoken in other people's faces. They don't need to be unnecessarily shouted in the hearing of your neighbors. There's still a discretion that's necessary. You know, John Adams famously said that our Constitution was intended to govern a moral and religious people. It's appropriate for no others. We're watching our society become less religious and consequently less moral. George Washington also talked about this in his farewell address. He talked about how democracy and liberty are entirely dependent upon religion and morality. And as Christians in a democracy, in a pluralistic society, we're going to spend a lot of time frustrated. We're going to spend a lot of time annoyed by what other people do. We're going to have lots of things in our heads, questions, ideas, arguments that are going to offend other people, and we need to learn that they should only be shared when necessary. We have to ask that question, you know, when is it necessary? The New Testament teaches that we should speak only things that edify. I mean, I know I'm guilty of not doing that. I know I'm guilty of posting things that are sometimes radical, because I'm reading things and thinking about things that other people aren't. I'm not having from my sources the sort of common sources others are getting their information from. And I would be lying if I said I don't know that what I'm about to post is different and may upset some people. That really needs to be posted privately. And I think many of us would benefit because we would just have more peace. There's no need to talk about those issues that you know are going to cause an explosion at the dinner table. You can deliberate on those issues. You don't need to settle things through debate, especially when you're in a crowd of people who don't even know how to debate. You can debate with yourself. Socrates taught this in Plato's dialogues. We can debate with ourselves. We can conduct this debate, this dialectical investigation, the kind we read of in Plato's dialogues. We can conduct those dialogues within ourselves. That's really the point of the dialogues, is to lead the soul through this dialogue that really should be conducted privately through the persons of the dialogue. It's really just leading the soul through this investigation, which we should do by ourselves. So I think that the criticism of social media is not helpful. I think extreme positions on modern social media is not reasonable. I think there is a problem that makes us both attracted to it and averse to it. And I think it's this need to learn and discipline ourselves to keep more private. Share edifying things, share encouraging things, share helpful things, but things that you know are going to tick off a portion of your relatives, friends, followers, customers, and so on. There's just no prudence in sharing those things. And, there's an old, this just popped in my head, an old Alice in Chains songs. Alice in Chains was a grunge rock band back in the 90s when I was in high school and college. And there's one line from one of the songs. There's a song called Down in the Hole. You might want to look it up. It's a good song. Down in a Hole. And it's a song sung by this singer who eventually died of a drug overdose, as so many of them do. But he says, I have been known as one to kick myself in the teeth, or I have been known to kick myself in the teeth. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing, posting so many of these things that really have no need to be shared. And that doesn't mean that they're not important. That doesn't mean that they're not helpful. But they're not helpful for that audience. Helpful for ourselves. I know I get into these things all the time. Part of my conversion to Catholicism was caused by this. I was in a Baptist church as a Protestant kid in college, and I'm listening to all the Protestant arguments, and I want to be a good Protestant. I'm taking notes. I'm studying. I'm learning. I'm learning, and I'm turning around and putting stuff into practice. I'm reforming my life. I'm working to become a model Protestant. And what I start to realize is the principles on which my Protestant teaching is based don't support the doctrine of the Trinity. And I'm putting those things together as a college-aged Baptist. And I remember talking to my Baptist Christian friends and my, quote-unquote pastor at the time, and everybody getting upset because, I dare to ask this question about how the Trinity can be proven with sola scriptura, and I'm asking it sincerely. I'm asking whether it's really necessary for us to believe in the Trinity, and everybody's acting like they're all offended. The pastor even used the word heretical. But when we look in history, we see that Protestantism certainly did lead men who were sort of the best practitioners of the religion. It led them to Unitarianism. So I wasn't crazy. I wasn't some depraved soul. I was actually following the principles. These principles lead to agnosticism. These principles lead to Unitarianism. They do. But you can just see that community wasn't serious about its principles. Protestantism really boils down to just anti-Catholicism. It's really a negative religion. It's a religion where you spend more time saying what you don't believe or identifying about what you don't do, rather than actually thinking about where the positive principles would lead if anyone actually followed them and employed them consistently. And I was serious, and I did that, and I immediately started to see there's no reason to believe in the Trinity if you are building a faith on sola scriptura. And I understood that, again, as a college kid, just putting everything together, because I was serious. Those thoughts should, even at that time, those thoughts should have gone into a diary or a journal, because that crowd had no interest in that discussion, and I should have known better. I should have known that crowd was not going to be interested in that discussion. So those are the kind of problems I run into. I disagree with Christians on many issues, many practical issues, educational issues, and I need to be careful. We all need to be careful to think about what we share and what we keep, inside our vest, as it was. Is that how the saying goes? Keep it in your vest, or some saying like that. So we need to learn who we can talk to, who we cannot talk to, what platform is appropriate for certain discussions and what platform is not appropriate. And we need to make sure that we're taking time to keep the most important things, our pearls, as it were. We keep those things private. Keep them private. Discuss them with God. Discuss them by ourselves, with ourselves. And avoid opening ourselves really to anyone, because I don't know about your experiences, but I've experienced through the years some of the people who I thought were trustworthy, they've turned out to be some of the biggest scoundrels in my life. Some of the things that have been done to me by people who I consider to be close friends, my known enemies don't do those things. And so it's not even that we should talk about these things with friends or with people from church or only with Christians. I don't think there's a distinction that can be made along the lines of who's Christian and who's not. We've got to be more careful, because these things can be used to destroy your life. These things can be used against you in public by malicious people. And as much as we can say that they're wrong for doing what they do, we have to look at it and say, you know what? He's a real jerk, and that was pretty slimy what he did, and I wouldn't do that to anyone. But at the same time, I could have avoided this if I was more prudent. And again, as I always say the proverb, a wise man, a prudent man, sees evil coming and avoids it. And that's what we need to do. So anyway, that was just a thought that I wanted to share from my study of John Adams. Great man. It was a great biography. I read it. Was David McCullough's. You can look this up on Amazon. David McCullough, The Life of John Adams. Great book. Definitely recommend it. And just so you know, HBO actually made a seven episode series based on that book on John Adams, which is awesome. My boys watched it and they loved it. It's a great short little video presentation of that biography by David McCullough. But I enjoyed the study, learned a lot, had a lot to think about, was challenged in some ways. Learned a lot about George Washington as well. He's the real superstar. Hope to study more about George Washington in the future, and also about a number of Catholics. You know, one interesting point about John Adams was John Adams, when he was in Philadelphia at one of the Continental Congresses, he actually visited a Catholic church, even though he was a New England Congregationalist, if you know what that means. Even though he was a puritanical-ish Protestant, when he was in Philadelphia, he visited Old St. Mary's Church, which was built, I don't know, in the early 1700s, maybe even earlier. Went in and sat there for a day and describes it in his journals. Again, describes it to his wife in his letters. So it's very interesting to see this sort of crossover between Catholic life and the life of the Protestant founding fathers. But there were other men. There was a Thomas Fitzsimmons, who I think was a delegate to the Continental Congress from Pennsylvania. I think he's from Pennsylvania, Thomas Fitzsimmons. And there was Daniel Carroll from Maryland. Those were two Catholic men in early America who were involved in the debates at the Continental Congress and who eventually signed the Constitution. So there is some Catholic history buried in early American government and history that I think is pretty interesting. I actually have two papers to write over the next month on those two Catholic congressmen, Thomas Fitzsimmons and Daniel Carroll. So I'm going to be digging into their lives and get to know them a little bit. But there's a lot of interesting stuff to study. So If you're looking for something to read, a movie to watch with the kids, an audiobook to listen to, check out John Adams by David McCullough. Pretty good. So anyway, I hope that's helpful. Let's consider the prudence or imprudence of sharing thoughts on social media publicly that really we should be chewing on privately. I think that will help all of us. God bless.